Thank you very much. It is a joy to be here. Thank you all for giving up your time to be present, really, to be present with those in the other world. And it's interesting that Josh Groban was being played, because I've been quite sentimental this week and kind of thinking a lot about, you know, people that have passed away and people who have had meaning in my life. And just as a bit of a funny incident, I actually, many years ago, wanted to train to do operatic singing. And so I went and saw a singing teacher, and she did the whole scale thing. You know, you do that kind of la, la, la business. And we went up and down the piano, and she said, "Oh, you're baritone." And I said, "That's wonderful. Josh Groban is baritone. Maybe you could teach me to sing like him." And she put her hand on my arm very gently and patted it. And she said, "I can only work with what I've got, dear." Which I was very offended by. But anyway, so I always love to hear Josh Groban. And it's one of those songs that I kind of go to in my sentimentality. You know, it's one of those things that always moves me into that place of remembering those who have gone on before. And already in this place of sentimentality this week, I saw my parents earlier in the week, and we were looking through photographs about, you know, my grandparents specifically. And my nana was a very precious, I mean precious in a beautiful, important, significant way, not precious as in, you know, demanding in that respect. But we were looking at pictures of her, and at various times throughout her life where she was vibrant and full of life and energy, and then latterly was very unwell. And one of the things that my nana always instilled into us, really, and certainly latterly when she was unwell, was the importance of our eyesight, which sounds an interesting thing to say, but she had diabetes herself. She had very poor health and was fearful that her eyesight would deteriorate because of diabetes. And, you know, I was remembering that and remembering how important it was for her that we took care of our eyes. And, you know, I'm a couple of years away from 50 now. So I've noticed that things are not quite as sharp as they once were. You know, I've noticed that things are a little bit more blurred around the edges than they used to be. And I've been kind of putting that off for a little while in terms of going and getting an eye test and seeing an eye doctor about that. And, you know, I noticed that when I was driving, I'm kind of not winking, that sounds really weird, but I'm kind of just checking, why is it clear in one eye and not so clear in the other? I'm thinking, I'm blaming the lights. It's clearly the lights that are wrong. The light bulbs aren't bright enough. The TV's too far away. I'm making excuses for this issue that I'm experiencing. But, you know, my nana's voice in my mind always is saying, get your eyes checked, get your eyes checked. You know, they're precious. Eyesight's precious. So I went, and it became very apparent that there was a prescription necessary, that I needed the glasses. I needed to give in and acknowledge, first of all, the age-related changes that all of us will experience to some degree. And so I got some glasses, which are absolutely great. But one thing that's really interesting to me is that how much I learned to accommodate that deficiency and dysfunction in my life. I learned very clearly, just from having my eyes tested, how we accommodate the lack. You know, we go into that place that I went into where I'm blaming everything outside of me. It must be the lighting that's wrong. It must be that the light bulbs are not bright enough. It must be that the TV somehow, the brightness has changed on it. I was going into this recognition that something outside of me was the cause of that dysfunction and that deficiency. And I'd made excuses. I'd blamed other things, and I'd even altered my behavior to actually accommodate that dysfunction, that deficiency. And so what happens is, in many respects, in many areas of life, we do that, don't we? We have a recognition that something isn't working or isn't feeling the way that we would like it to feel, and we make excuses for it. We maybe blame other things. We don't take responsibility for things, and we start to accommodate the lack in our life. And in some cases, however long that lack goes on and that accommodation goes on, we normalize it. We normalize the dysfunction, and then we live from that place of, it's normal to have less than. It's normal to feel less than, and it's normal to accept less than we actually deserve. And so just having an eye test for me really revealed on so many other levels how we do accommodate dysfunction. We normalize it, and what we have to do is tell the absolute truth to ourselves, first of all, about our experience, about what's going on. We have to tell ourselves the truth, the microscopic truth. And truth really isn't always pleasant, is it? You know, truth, nobody wants to hear the word no. Nobody sometimes likes to hear the reality of the situation from their perspective. But truth is, I believe, a spiritual cleanser. I think that when we are willing to be truthful with ourselves and we're willing to tell the truth to others, there is a power that truth holds, which dispels all that, that sense of deficiency and dysfunction that we may be living with. And truth is painful, isn't it? You know, nobody really wants to hear it, especially if that truth suggests that we need to make changes in our life, even though we know that making those changes are for our greatest good. And interestingly, I'm doing this talk today with you on ISC because about 2 years ago, truth finds us. I think there's something very powerful about truth, that when we recognize it, when there's a part of us that acknowledges something isn't right, we give permission for truth to come into our experience. And sometimes that truth drips very, very gently into our awareness, and we're given chance to consider and reflect and, go into a place of introspection about what truth is revealing. And other times truth hits us like a truck, doesn't it? Sometimes just the reality of the situation really bubbles up in our awareness to the point that we cannot escape it. And I had that moment 2 years ago, literally an hour before I was taking a service for an ISC, when the recognition was that the relationship that I was living in was not good for me, was not healthy for me, didn't take me to the greatest and grandest version of who I am. And that wasn't a problem with him. He just wasn't able to live at the level that I needed. And so we have to acknowledge that in that truth, there has to be change. If we desire to live beyond where we currently are in that moment, the cost sometimes is financial when we're willing to tell the truth. I obviously bought 2 pairs of glasses. There's a tiny cost, but sometimes the cost is bigger than that. Sometimes by acknowledging the truth, we fear the cost, we fear the consequence, we fear that there are going to be emotional repercussions, psychological repercussions, environmental repercussions, that by telling the truth, sometimes it means that our life has to radically change in ways that may attract judgment or criticism or blame. But what is the alternative, friends? What is the alternative? The alternative is that we live with a recognition of that there is a deficiency in our life, in our world, in our mind, in our thinking, in our hearts. We live from that place of recognition, and yet the fullness of how our life could truly be can never be fully realized until we're willing to take that step. You see, and once we become aware of that, there is a huge responsibility that we all have then to start to live in accordance with the truth of that awareness. With all awareness has to come responsibility. You have to be responsible then for your choices. It can't be the light bulb's fault that your eyes are faulty. It can't be. It can't be anybody else's fault that that relationship isn't working. It can't be anything external. No relationship can ever be damaged from the outside in. No relationship ever fails because of an outside influence on some level. There is a reflection going on in our lives that shows up because of what's going on within us. And so we're looking at right now, in the world certainly at large, a lot of behaviors that look incredibly dysfunctional. We're looking at that every single day. But really all that is a reflection of the wars that we have in our own worlds on a day-to-day basis as well. How many of us are living in war zones? And I'm not necessarily talking about Ukraine or Yemen or the many other countries in the world that are at war, but how many of us are living in our own war zones? How many of us are living in a place of deficiency and dysfunction, and yet saying nothing and doing nothing and changing nothing? How many of us are living with a recognition that how I'm living, how we're living, is not the greatest and grandest experience that I want for myself? And yet we choose to say nothing and do nothing and change nothing. And I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that this is easy. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that in that recognition that we should throw off the shackles and just reject all things and live in a very, very different, society. We can't always immediately. But once we are willing to tell ourselves the absolute truth, courage comes. Courage comes to move you into a brighter experience. And when we start to recognize that that power that we have within us is given an opportunity to express itself in the world, because everything we ever need is within us. All that courage, all that power, all that truth, all that trust, everything we ever need to live fully is present. And many people pray from an external source. They pray for the world out there to change, to accommodate it so that we can live easier. We pray for the war to stop so that there is a sense that we feel comfortable, we feel at peace. There's an external focus on change to happen. And so what I want to do is to flip that round. Look at your own wars, look at your own conflicts, look at what you're offering to the world, look at what you're thinking, look at how you're thinking, look at how you're being. You know, I read somewhere, I think it was a gentleman called Gary Zukav, who was a phenomenal author. And he talked about authenticity and really what authenticity is. And he says that authenticity is the alignment of the personality with the soul. Our personality are made up of our consistent thoughts, our consistent emotions, and our consistent behaviors. And if we can be in alignment in our thinking, in our feeling, in our behaviors, with the love that is contained within the soul, then we all start to live from a very authentic place. We all start to behave authentically, lovingly, kindly. And we cannot have love without pain. We cannot live from that place of authenticity without there being some degree of recognition of dysfunction. We have to acknowledge that. But understanding that just as the truth is a spiritual cleanser, courage is the thing that will move you forward. We have to have a vision to move forward. Interestingly, vision is the one thing that pulls us forward in life. Having the awareness that something more is available, having a vision of what you want to feel, having a vision of how you want to live, having a vision of how you want to be in the world is the thing that pulls you forward out of this present moment of conflict and disharmony and dysfunction and deficiency. Having a vision of more is the thing that moves us. So what is your vision? Because we spend so much time focusing on the dysfunction and the deficiency, we don't focus on the vision that pulls us out of it. So what would that be? And I'm not necessarily saying that you should all give up the relationships that are unhappy straight away, change the job, move house, do all these big things. But just look at your thoughts, look at your feelings, look at your behaviors in life that serve to move you closer to authenticity or further away. Once we have a vision, we can start to formulate a movement process, a plan to experience the more, the fullness, the authenticity of who we truly are. And so this interesting talk that we're doing right now, hopefully on some level resonates. And certainly as I'm speaking about it to you, I'm also very mindful of the many areas of my life where maybe I'm not living authentically. You know, that I'm saying I'm fine when I'm not fine really, or I'm doing things that I'm not always comfortable doing, but I do them anyway for many reasons. And I think we all have that. We all have that facade that sometimes we present to the world that isn't authentic. You know, how many times is it that people say to you, how are you? And you go, I'm fine. Is that true? Is that really true? And so we have an aversion sometimes to the truth. And yet, why is that? Why are we averse to being truthful about who we truly are and how we truly feel? We have a fear of consequence many, many times. And so I would ask you, just as we come to the end of this talk, to recognize that the most important thing is to tell the absolute microscopic truth to yourself, about your experience of life, about how you think, how you feel, and how you behave, and whether that is in alignment with who you want your life, how you want to be, who you want to be, and how your life you would choose it to be as well. So thank you for listening.